Welcome to this Cambridge Marketing College webinar. My name is Neil Wilkins. I'm one of the tutors at the college, and today we're going to talk about campaign planning that stands up to scrutiny. Now, of course, if you think about it, obviously, this is what we would want to be doing if we're developing a marketing communications campaign or any kind of project within marketing. We want it to be robust. We want it to show very clear return on investment of the resources that we're putting in to create it. So that's what we're going to talk about today, the importance of this and actually how you go about creating campaign plans that will stand up to scrutiny from many different perspectives and angles. So what we're going to focus on is the ability to be able to plan with clarity, to justify your decisions and the direction you're taking it with confidence, and really importantly, in my book, improve the evidence that you're using to actually have those conversations. So we're going to explore how to design a campaign that can be very clearly explained. You can rationalize it, you can defend it if challenged, and then really kind of working from a position of this is the best possible version of a campaign plan that we can create. So we're going to look at the structure, we're going to look at how to and what kind of evidence to gather to back up your story, and we're going to base this around professional judgment, not just creativity. So we're going to look at this from a commercial perspective because as a content creator or a marketer, it is very, very easy to get swept along by the beauty of the creative that you're using in your campaign, and particularly with things like AI and the most amazing kind of video content that we can now create very quickly and easily, very easily to get swept along by that and forget the commercials, forget the fundamental reason why you're doing your campaign, which is to stimulate and hopefully enhance behavior change in your audience, to maybe create lead generation. All those kinds of things are important from a creative standpoint, but also very important from a commercial angle. So we're going to try and balance those two as we go through this. Now, scrutiny really does matter. Campaigns that you develop are going to be questioned by a whole different range of people, individuals, and disciplines. The stakeholders who are going to be impacted by this because it's going to be challenged by maybe customer service or customer support because you're putting this product launch out through your campaign and they're going to need to support it. So they are going to be questioning why and when and what they need to do to get involved. As an example, your finance teams almost certainly will get involved and will be questioning your campaign. Is it necessary? If you're viewing it as a budget spend rather than a budget investment, that's a very different word, but also a very different frame of mind, if you like. So helping the finance teams to see that this campaign is an investment rather than a cost is a fundamental difference to how many of us have created campaigns in the past. We're also going to look at how this is going to be questioned by your clients or your customers. So the end recipients of your campaign, how are they going to feel and believe in you and trust you and hopefully feel more loyal to you after they've seen the campaign? So they're going to be questioning and looking at this with a lot of scrutiny now. Assessors, obviously, if you're looking at this from a learning perspective, talking about the college here, so if you're doing any kind of qualification or an apprenticeship, your campaigns are going to be scrutinized by the assessors. And also the performance data, you're going to be looking at how did I do? So one of the scrutineers here is you, because you want to know that this campaign performs better in a holistic sense than previous campaigns. If it does, great. What did you learn? If it doesn't, great. What could you have learned? So strong planning ensures that you can explain every decision you've taken very, very clearly to all of this diverse range of individuals and disciplines. So think about this then, just a quick reflection for you. Where has one of your campaign decisions been challenged before? Just take a moment to pause and think about that. Have you been challenged on a campaign? I have most recently with a particular client. I'm going to play the game too here, and for me, the thing was about timing. There was some product challenges, should we say, that meant that the campaign went out a little bit too early because the product that it was supporting isn't quite ready. So there's a challenge there. And maybe then, again, being challenged with the scrutiny that really matters, maybe I could have, should have been a little bit closer to the stakeholders who would have known that. So again, all these sort of things, we can always open up little windows of opportunity for better communication, better sharing of information. So where's one of your campaign decisions been challenged before? Maybe choose quite a recent one and think about that. And of course, the problem here that we're trying to solve here is that a lot of the campaigns that we run are typically quite reactive. I mean, common weaknesses are tactical thinking before strategic thinking. Often when we're doing campaigns, we're thinking tactically about which channel, what kind of creative, what's the timing here? Do I have the resources to be able to schedule this thing on time? Rather than thinking the fundamental reason, why am I doing this? What is it supporting? Is this helping us to achieve an objective, a bit more strategic, longer term thinking? That is a big, big problem and a common weakness with reactive campaign planning. We also over rely often on what worked last time. I know because I do this, and I know you do this too, is that we'll kind of just almost play it safe, a little bit too safe by thinking, well, it did work last time well enough. So therefore, if we just do it again, we're doing a good job. Well, actually, that probably isn't a big strength, is it? So we're going to challenge that a little bit later. I mean, poor documentation of the rationale behind the campaign is often part of a kind of almost a weak brief. And particularly if you work with an agency or some third party to create and deliver your campaigns, then poor documentation of the original brief, the reasoning behind it strategically and tactically, and the rationale behind why this campaign's needed. Because, if we're going to be committing resources, budget, time, people to this campaign, we need a rationale to say this is going to be worth it potentially. And also, again, a weak linkage to measurable objectives. If we're just doing it for its sake because we always do it, or because, well, we do this once a month and we always have, that's not a good thing that will stand up to scrutiny. So that's very, very reactive. So we need to be stronger in the way that we link our campaign targets to measurable, smart objective. And of course, scrutiny will expose weak foundations. It will just, and then you'll be on the back foot. It will just kind of open up that, oh, yes, I probably should have done that. And oh, yeah, no, I didn't think of that. And then it's too late. And your credibility as a professional will be declining. It just naturally will, because that is just the nature of the beast, isn't it? If you do this well, you plan it well, you've got good evidence, everything kind of stands up to kind of scrutiny, then you're in a really strong position. It doesn't necessarily mean you're right, but it means that you're in a stronger position than you would otherwise have been. So I'm kind of using this phrase, standing up to scrutiny, but what does that really mean? Well, a campaign stands up to scrutiny when the objectives are clear and measurable, they're smart, when the audience selection is very clearly justified, when the messaging aligns with the insight of what the market or the audience wants or needs, when the channel choices are evidence-based, so you're not just making it up or just using the same ones because we always do. Budget allocation has rationale. A campaign will stand up to scrutiny when you've got a rationale behind the budget allocation. Notice we don't say their budget spend. We're not spending here, we're investing. That's a mindset shift for many marketers and communicators, thinking of every single pound or dollar that you allocate as an investment. In other words, we need to see a return of some sort of value back from this. And of course, the phrase we use is ROI, return on investment. And a campaign stands up to scrutiny when the metrics, the measures, and the analysis of that campaign align with the target objectives. In other words, everything is fully aligned. That's what we're looking at here. And again, it doesn't mean that you're completely correct all the time, but what it means is things are just aligned. So they will stand up to scrutiny. Nobody is expecting perfection. Well, most people aren't expecting perfection, but what they are expecting is a rigor in your thinking. A really conscious and aware marketer or content creator or campaign manager will be thinking all the time. They won't be on autopilot. And that's really what we're looking at here, is to just always be awake. Where can I improve? What are the things I need to check off so that I can stand up to any scrutiny from any different angle? That's clear. So, campaign planning in this kind of way is structured thinking. It really is. This is mindful marketing. And I'd like you to think as we go through this kind of little framework, which of these stages do you typically rush or maybe even not include if you're planning a campaign? A campaign plan is not a creative brainstorm. Okay. The creative is just one small element of a process. So if you're thinking campaigns are creative, well, hopefully they are, but that's not the aim of the game here. A campaign is a sequence of deliberate decisions. So the framework is the context, the objectives, smart of course, the audience, the proposition, the channels, the budget, and the measurement. The campaign then sits above audience, proposition, and channels. It's just a layer, if you like. That is the creative element of the campaign, but it's the framework that is the really key thing. So, out of those things, what do you typically miss completely or rush? Context, objectives, audience, proposition, channels, budget, or measurement. And we could add another one, which is analysis of what I would do differently next time after measurement. Because all very well measuring, but if the measures don't then stimulate an improvement next time, you've missed a trick. You really have. And again, that's another great way of having conversations with others that, you're admitting, I probably won't get this campaign perfectly, but what we are going to do with best endeavor is see if we can improve it both this time versus the last time and next time too. And people will then trust you and you will get a high level of confidence in their minds if you take this approach. So let's break these kind of areas down then. So the first section is this context and objectives. So start with the context, not the creativity. This is a tricky one. If you are an artistic, creative marketer or content creator or campaign planner, you're going to want to start with the creativity. But please, please try and avoid that at this stage. Start with the context. Strong campaigns are responses to context, not trends. So you can use Pestle, you can use SWOT, you can use a whole bunch of other kind of tools to understand the context. The business goals, yes, obviously, because you're trying to help support achieving those. The market conditions, the trends that you're seeing out there, the competitor activity, and customer behavior. And so the context is how you are then going to respond to those things, not just, well, there they are, I've written them down, and now I'm going to do some lovely creative. It's not that. This is about a deep understanding of the why behind your campaign. Then from that, we can then move to setting objectives. And these objectives can obviously then be defended because they are responding to the context. They're not just being set on a whim. They're not just being set so that it sort of almost appeases the management or things like that. And I've seen all of this, and I'm sure you've probably experienced it too. What we're looking at here very, very clearly, this whole idea that the objectives, the SMART objectives, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound, are linking to a wider business strategy in the context of that context we've just described. So they are realistic because we understand what the market's doing and what it needs, but they're also aligned with the business goals and strategy. So if asked why this objective, could you answer confidently the objective of the campaign that you're kind of running, hopefully sort of in the back of your mind here? Could you have actually defended it? Why this objective for this campaign? And if you're linking it to the business strategy, it's in the context of the wider world and what you found from your research and analysis, then you're in a good, strong position. And of course, this is setting the foundations for what will come. And you can then link the campaign to commercial outcomes. And this is so important because, as Peter Drucker says, what gets measured gets managed. This is going to then focus you in. Again, beyond the creative, this is focusing this campaign in to what really, really matters. So campaign objectives must connect to things like revenue, to lead generation, to brand awareness, measurable brand awareness, not just a woolly kind of sort of statement. Customer retention, again, absolute numbers. Lifetime customer value, CLV, that's the phrase or the acronym for that one. All of these things are opportunities for you to connect your campaign to meaningful stuff. And if you can do that, that is the strongest possible evidence that you can then use if you're in a conversation with the finance director or somebody in customer services or customer support or your sales team. You can then show and demonstrate your campaign is aligned with the business. It's not just doing woolly, fluffy, marketing-y stuff. And that is something that as a discipline we've been challenged with over the years. And that is where often a lot of us have fallen short. But now we know there's a better way going forward. And then we'll move into the next section. Having created that foundation for this campaign that's going to stand up to really strong scrutiny, we can now move into section 2, which is audience and insight. So the audience selection can be with evidence. And this avoids this whole kind of, well, it's for everyone kind of targeting. And I still hear that. And it baffles me how some marketers, hopefully not you, but some marketers will say, well, this product and service, it appeals to everyone. I can tell you with real truth here, and this is the cold hard fact, that no product or service or brand ever has targeted everyone, has been relevant to everyone. There is just no kind of marketing where that is true. So what we need to do is start to think, okay, let's hone in, let's get a laser focus into the target audience, and let's gather some insight. Let's look at some CRM data, some customer relationship management system data. If we've already got an audience like this in our customer database, well, let's go and have a look and see who they are and what they are. This will help your campaign to stand up to scrutiny because you're identifying who you're actually going to talk to. The behavioral insight that comes from them, it's all very well having a definition and a persona, customer's persona that you're targeting, but how do they actually behave? It's not what they say they want. It's not what they say they need or what the research shows. It's how do they actually behave when they see something like the campaign that you're about to send to them. And that will enable you to refine the persona, getting down much more deeply into the insight of that customer and really getting into their mind. There are lots of things like segmentation frameworks and stuff that you can work on here. But the idea here really is that you're justifying the audience choice clearly by getting really laser focused on them. And of course, this audience is the audience that is going to help you most likely achieve those earlier objectives that we've set. In the context of the business strategy, where the business wants to go, it needs this kind of customer, and in the context of the environment outside that we discussed right at the start. So things that, as you can hear and see, are starting to line up, and this is where it gets really interesting. And at this point, we need to ask the insight question. And this is something I'd like you to think about with this campaign idea that you've got in your head, or this campaign that you're reviewing from the past, is what is the core tension your campaign is addressing? This is an interesting one here because every campaign needs a clear insight. It needs to show that it is actually delivering some kind of need. It is kind of hopefully an unmet need. It's creating a little bit of tension. It's creating a little bit of a motivation or maybe an inspiration to engage a little bit further, to find out more about the product or service that is mentioned in the campaign. Every campaign needs this. It needs to kind of rock the boat, to use a phrase here. It needs to cut through the noise and the chaos. So the question really is on the campaign that you're thinking about in your mind as you reflect on how do I do this stuff, is what is the core tension your campaign is addressing? If it doesn't have a tension, it will not work. It'll just be part of the wallpaper, part of the scenery. It'll be the thing that people just scroll straight past. But if it addresses a tension in the minds of your target audience, that target audience we just talked about, then there is a chance that this thing might land. And from that, we can then start to create a defensible proposition, the core message, the core kind of value that we're trying to get across here. And your proposition, if you're going to do this properly, has got to answer three things. Why this? Why now? and why us? Because weak propositions collapse if any of those three things, under kind of quite tight scrutiny, don't stand up. Why this? So it's the values. Why now? It's the timeliness of this thing. And why us? What makes us different? What makes us better to trust? What makes us the one to go with, or at least to inquire a little bit further with? That is a defensible proposition. And if you can't answer those three things with your campaign, then it's going back further upstream to the things we just covered to make sure that you can uncover maybe a little missing link or a little weak point in your previous thinking. So why this? Why now? Why us? Absolutely key. And once we start then to develop the messaging around this, we can then start to answer those questions. This is not rocket science. When you stop and think about it, these are absolutely logical, sensible, and intuitively important things that will be the building blocks for a really successful campaign that stands up to scrutiny. We're not creating new things here. We're actually just evolving the best practice of campaign planning. So if you think about and reflect upon your campaign that you're thinking of, which part of your message feels weakest if it was to be challenged? Because before launching your new campaign or before reviewing the one that you've just done, ask, is it clear? Is it relevant? Is it distinctive? And is it credible? And you can apply the so what test at every level because you don't want to just take the first answer. You want to then go deeper into, is it clear? Well, you can't just say, well, yes. Well, why is it clear? How is it clear? How could it be more clear, for example? Go deeper. Ask the so what test at every level. Is it relevant? Relevant to whom? Relevant to when? Relevant to how? And to what kind of ends? Is it distinctive? Well, distinctive compared to what? Is it distinctive enough? Could it be more distinctive? Is it credible? Well, credible in the mind of who? Well, the target audience. Well, how do they judge credibility? What evidence do they need to be able to assess whether it's credible or not? These are the kind of so what questions that you need to test at every level. Really, really important. If you just publish, if you just press play, if you just put this thing out into the world without answering these questions, you will not necessarily stand up to scrutiny. You might fall lucky, but the chances are you're kind of really increasing the risk that this could fall apart. And it might only be just one weak link. It might not be the whole thing that falls apart, but it might just be one little reason that if you had solved that before pressing go, you could have actually had a much more successful campaign. And that's why I'm talking about this as a process. And we haven't really got into creative yet at all, have we? We're talking about the robustness of the process of our campaign planning. And then we can start to think about the next section, which is channel strategy. Channel choices require a rationale. Avoid choosing channels just because they're fashionable. If everyone says, oh, you've got to be on TikTok or oh, you've got to be doing Instagram. Well, maybe you do, maybe you don't. It does depend upon the audience behavior, the cost effectiveness of a particular channel, the stage of the customer journey that channel is within the customer's experience here within this campaign, and any previous performance data that will help you to justify that, okay, this is the right channel versus this one. And of course, the big litmus test of all of the channel choices are, is it relevant for your customer? Is it relevant for the audience you're targeting? Because I always use the phrase, I want to play in my customer or my audience's playground rather than getting them to come over to my playground. So it isn't about me. It's not about where I would prefer to be running my campaign. It's about where they are. It's about, is this meaningful for them? Is this going to be an easy place to hook into them from their perspective? So channel choices require a rationale. So you've got to think deeply about this. And it may be that you've got it right so far, but it might be more likely that you need to do some tuning. And it could be less likely, but possible that you need to completely rethink your channel strategy. You might be just posting campaigns in the wrong place. You might not be, but you might be. So it's this kind of mindful thinking about these kinds of parts of the process that are really key. And what we're doing here is that we're kind of starting to sort of justify our media mix, why each channel was selected, what role it plays in the funnel or customer journey. And also, really importantly, how when we've chosen channels, they integrate together. Again, this is a lot of thinking that many marketers and campaign owners don't do. They kind of just post the campaign sort of creative there. They put another piece there in a different channel. There's another channel over there. They'll put some stuff in there. And they don't think about the overarching and more holistic experience that a customer or target audience might have, because they might see you there, but they also might see you there at a different point in the day. And they might actually just fall upon you over there too. And if that happens, well, which one should they have responded to? Well, what did you actually want them to do? What was the call to action? Is this too many places? Is it not enough places? Because actually they needed to see you 6 times before they were going to respond. All of these questions come into campaign planning that stands up to scrutiny. So campaign plans should show a clear role for each and every channel, almost a job description, if you like, so that, you're giving the job description to TikTok to do this part in the process. And there we go. It's process that we're really following through here. That's key. And then, of course, we can follow some budget allocation logic. If asked to justify your spend split, what evidence could you currently cite? And it might not be actual budget. You might not be doing paid media through some of these channels, but you're doing time, you've got energy, you spent resource of what the business would say is, you as a personal resource. So even if you're not spending money or investing money in a particular channel, you're devoting company resource to that channel by just focusing on it. So you need to be able to defend your budget decisions, your resource decisions, and they've got to reflect historical data, the expected ROI, the risk appetite, and any kind of testing allocation that you want to put in there too. And I would always say, when you're thinking, and particularly of a new channel, this is where this can come in, really interestingly, is that there's probably a rule of thumb, a 70-20-10 kind of split, if you like, over how you might sort of think about all the channels working together. So maybe 70% of it is core. It's core channels because it's channels that, you can rely upon. Maybe 20% is kind of emerging channels, the ones that you might have done a little campaign or a bit of a testing in the past. And then maybe 10% is experimental. And for a lot of people, the experimental bit is more the kind of AI stuff, I guess, right now. So that would be an acceptable way. So even if challenged, you could say, well, look, I'm basing 70%, so good over 2/3 of what I'm doing is kind of in a safe core kind of space, but I don't want to just kind of keep it as it's been. I want to see what the emerging channels might be. So there's a 20% kind of allocation there because we might see that we can get some competitive edge in those different channels. And I want to spend 10% or invest 10% rather, falling into my own words there, invest 10% in an experimental channel because we've never done this one before, but it could be the next big thing. Might not be, but it's only 10%. So therefore, we can justify the split of our spend of resource. And that will, again, because you're thinking about this, because you've got a balance, it'll give people confidence when they hear this. And then we're looking at the timing and the delivery. This was kind of a little bit deeper into the process, the one that I kind of, when I reflected on, thought, could have done better in that example. So we've got to be thinking about the timing of our campaigns, considering market cycles, maybe seasonality, customer behavior patterns, which might be different at different times, the internal readiness to support. If this thing goes really well as a campaign, can we support it? Oftentimes people are sort of thinking, well, what if it doesn't work? But actually, what if it really works? What if this thing goes viral? What are we going to do then? So not just planning and risk planning for kind of underperformance, but what about for overperformance as well? And of course, because we are working here generally in campaigns in a public sense, what about the competitors? Competitors will respond to our campaigns. So how are we going to respond to them? How are we going to respond to their response, if you see what I mean here? So timing here is going to improve. If you think about this stuff, it's going to strengthen your strategy. Because even if you've done everything else really, really well, you've thought mindfully about all of the parts of the process to this point, but you get the timing wrong, again, it's a weak point in the whole chain of events. So this one is also really, really clear. And there could be some other things, again, depending on the industry that you work in, where some governance and risk management, because of the style of business that you're in, this comes into play as well. So if you have to get content approvals, if you have the creative has to go through an approval process, you've got to be factoring that into the timing and delivery, because again, giving people enough time to comment and then for you to make any necessary amendments is really important. Certain industries, certain marketers will face legal compliance as well, where you have to go through a legal process before you can release the campaign. Brand safety, contingency planning, that risk management that I was talking about before, those things are going to be absolutely key to do in certain industries and certain styles of business. Campaigns that anticipate risk are easier to defend. If you can show you've put this into your processes up front and you've got the people who are going to be involved in these things on board early, then the confidence level goes up in both you, but also then the potential success of the campaign itself. And let's just say now you rolled it out. So you've got an appropriate creative that layered on top of that, and you've delivered the campaign. What are we now going to be focusing on? Well, it is, of course, metrics. It's the performance. So metrics that align with the objectives, as we've said before, metrics have to really directly reflect the campaign goals. So that you are going to be measuring real relevant things, not just this whole thing, which really, really irates me, where people say, oh, well, I'm doing this campaign to create some brand awareness. I mean, if that is not the weakest, less able to stand up to scrutiny goal that you've ever heard, it's not measurable. Well, it's not smart, basically. It's not specific. It's not measurable. It's not, well, it might be realistic, but it's not kind of action orientated and it isn't time bound. It's just so woolly and weak. So our kind of metrics, the sorts of metrics that we're talking about here are things like reach, impressions, and brand recall for awareness. If we're looking at engagement rate, that's for consideration of our product or service. And if we're looking at some of the more technical conversion metrics, then those again are going to really feed into our commercial position of this campaign. So if it was retention, for example, that we were looking for here, repeat purchases or customer lifetime value would be key metrics that we'd want to factor in. And it doesn't mean you have to load your campaign with absolutely every metric. Again, just picking and selecting the most appropriate ones for parts of the journey or for the actual smart objectives that you're trying to achieve, but make them tangible, make them meaningful to the business. Then they will stand up to scrutiny. And what we're looking to do is really be ready to answer questions like, how do we know this worked? What contributed most? And what would we repeat next time or remove if we had another go at this? And so we're going to be using some really tangible, really clear kind of evidence-based stuff. So I would be thinking naturally CRM tracking. I'd be thinking like some A/B testing tools. I'd be thinking maybe Google Analytics if there's a website involved in the campaign, etc., etc., etc. So there's a lot of things that you need to kind of get down into the detail for. But those are the three key questions that we're looking to answer here, and we need to be able to answer them before somebody asks the question. That's the key, because then we're always on the front foot, not on the back foot. So be ready to answer with whatever it is you're measuring. How do we know this campaign worked? What part of it contributed most? And what would we repeat or remove next time? Because after launch, this is giving us an opportunity to review. So the thing is actually kind of up there, it's working, and maybe not actually until the end of the campaign, but maybe after we've launched it, we start to do already some post-campaign scrutiny. So we start to look at what's happening. And particularly if this is a long-running campaign that might be lasting a number of weeks or months, this gives us a chance to start to do the measurement and control, not waiting to the end of the campaign, but actually mid-campaign as well. So we can review the assumptions we've made versus the actual outcomes, any variance between the performance we were expecting or hoping and actually what then happened. So maybe some unintended consequences of a particular situation that may be changed mid-campaign. Because if you think that your campaign, particularly a longer one, is going to perform exactly the same at the beginning as it does at the end, Well, good luck because the world moves on. Competitors will react, customers change. The economics might sort of change in the macro of the world. Things that you can't control will potentially have an impact here. So those unintended things outside of your control, you've got to keep a watch on those. This is mindful marketing, remember. And any lessons learned or being learned within the process of running the campaign, again, looking to capture those. So the model is quite simple. You collect, you compare, you interpret, and then you recommend the next step. And if you do that, not only iteratively at the end of the process, but throughout the campaign, you're going to be in a much stronger position to always be using the latest evidence and information, always having your finger on the pulse of the campaign and being truly, truly in charge if challenged. And what we're doing by doing that is actually building an audit trail, isn't it? Because if you think about this, what I'm advocating is constantly writing stuff down, building a process that we could then repeat if we wanted to next time. We could hand over maybe to another member of staff or a colleague to do, maybe in their work as well. And what we're creating here is some really clear documentation, the brief, the insight sources, the budget rationale, approval process, if that's appropriate for you, and then a results summary. And documentation protects credibility. So if you're not around, or maybe you've got the day off or something, and the question is raised, it's like, well, here's our audit trail of what's going on. So this stuff can support you even if you're not there. Hugely powerful. And particularly if you're working in a larger team where you need to be able to demonstrate your activities within a broader team or group of people. And or if you're using third party, an agency, etc. This is a great way of showing who did what and when and why. So that audit trail always gives you, not so you can apportion blame, not so you can judge, but you can always see where the upsides and maybe some of the challenges were in your process. It's a great way of actually running campaigns in this kind of way. And of course, then we need to then think about, okay, so if all kind of kicks off, and if I am then challenged in terms of having to defend a campaign, maybe in a meeting, what you need to be prepared for is to explain the objective. Remember, it's commercial, not just marketing. The insight, remember that context bit, the audience logic, so why and who you're targeting, that laser focus, and then the measurement approach. Remember, that comes back to those smart commercial objectives. Notice in there, there's very, very little about creative. Very, very little. Campaigns are not made or broken on creative in most instances. Sometimes they are. Sometimes the creative is just so good it blows everything else out of the water in a good way. But the vast majority of campaigns don't have that amazing a creative that it overrides this. This is where proper campaign planning starts and ends. And the confidence that you'll have going into a meeting to explain those things will come from pre-preparation. So a question here for you to reflect on is, could you explain your current campaign logic in under 2 minutes? The campaign that you're thinking about, either the upcoming one or the one that you've just done. Could you explain the campaign logic, the objective, the insight, the audience logic, and the measurement approach? Could you do that really confidently in under 2 minutes? If the answer is, not sure I can, Neil, then that gives you the answer you need, that you need to be basically gathering and auditing the information that you've got or preparing it for when you get to that point in the process. And this will make your life easier and really put you on a pedestal of best practice marketer within your organization. And what we're doing here is we're turning a process into improvement. Scrutiny that we're talking about here, people challenging you, people saying, well, why did you do that? Isn't necessarily a criticism. It's an opportunity for refinement. Because let's face it, all right, there are personalities at play here. There will probably be egos, yours, mine, and the other person's at play here. But actually, ultimately, what we're all trying to do is to create a better commercial situation going forward. So we all are, even if we don't realize it, actually pulling in the same direction. So scrutiny and challenges is not criticism, it's refinement. Campaigns improve when questioned intelligently. So even if you think, oh, it's a bit of a dumb question, why would you ask me that? It's my responsibility to do that. I'll deal with it. That's actually quite defensive. And that's probably not really picking up the actual intent that came through from being challenged, because probably the intent that came through was lack of understanding. It was probably that you didn't share in the first place the clarity of the why behind the campaign, how you do this, and you weren't really open and transparent, maybe, with what actually happened. Maybe you were on the back foot, feeling defensive because, well, culturally, that's how we've always been. And if that is the truth, then this is a great opportunity to maybe do things differently. So here's your checklist then, rounding this off to hopefully increase your confidence in getting this thing right. So your campaign defense checklist, if we call it defense, because probably if challenged, that's how you're going to feel, but you can go on the front foot. If before the launch of your campaign, you ask, is the objective clear and linked to business goals? Is my audience evidence-based? Is the insight genuine? Is my channel mix justified? Are the measurements aligned? And is all my documentation and the process complete? And if you can tick that off and actually give some examples in each of those questions that you pose to yourself, then you can say you have got a defendable, proactive, actually, because you've got this in advance, situation, project, stroke, campaign ready to deliver or to be assessed by the organization. So a final reflection to kind of bring this one now round full circle is that strong campaigns are not those that avoid scrutiny. Actually, what you'll find is that they welcome it. So when planning is structured, decisions are very easy to defend, and improvement just becomes systematic, part of the process of just getting better and better. So my final parting question for you here is, what are you going to change in your next campaign plan to ensure that it stands up to scrutiny? Because if you do, I think you're going to be going into that campaign fully armed, really confident, and I would suggest there's a very, very good chance that that campaign is going to perform better than anything that's gone before. So I wish you good luck. Hopefully that now enables you to be creating campaign plans and maybe some shorter term activity as well that stand up to any scrutiny from anywhere in the business and from outside. So I wish you good luck and have a great rest of your day.